I was transitioning from one room to another, there was this staircase, right? As you have in the big buildings. And so we took the stairs to go up one floor, and one mother had gone there to just breastfeed her baby. And it touched me because I was having a baby at home. We had our daughter in October, and so when the war started and all this craziness, she was only a few months old. And when I saw this this mom not having the privacy of her home and the security of her home and bedroom and so forth to just care for her own baby, she was seeking and she needed a little bit of privacy, so she was on the staircase. That really broke me. Well, I just didn't know if...
But you mean like look at him?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. That's what I meant. He got it. He has... Anyways, it's about war.
Okay, it is, okay.
So yes, it all started at the end of February, and it hit us pretty bad because we did not know exactly what was going on. There was only so much on the news, and then people started coming from Ukraine into Romania, and we started hearing about this from friends who would travel to the border. And the churches were the first to start responding, churches and individuals, to all of these people coming from Romania. I hesitate to call all of them, yes. I hesitate to call all of them refugees because many of them were just trying to pass through our country, going towards Western Europe. Some of them only crossed the border to safety and were waiting to go back into Ukraine as soon as possible, which to this day, in many parts, is not possible.
One of the things we found was that nobody knew what was happening, and so we just had to act. There were people that had left their house with nothing but a plastic bag that they'd stuffed a couple of clothes in, because nobody was really expecting this to happen. Nobody really believed that it would actually come to this. So they weren't really prepared. And so people started just walking towards the border with Romania, and they were coming in. I mean, thousands were crossing the border every day. And so we had to just mobilize everything that we could and help them. And so that meant finding shelter, that meant feeding people, that meant clothes and everything that they needed to live, especially that there were mainly mothers with children. Because in the first, I think maybe 24 hours of the war, men were able to get out, but soon they were forbidden to leave the country. And so we were having just moms with 2 or 3 kids coming in. And so lots of them were babies, some of them could hardly walk. And so you had to provide everything that they needed.
So quite quickly, we joined efforts with other churches. As a matter of fact, we like to call our little group of about 7, 8 churches and 2 or 3 nonprofits. We call it UBC 22, Ukrainian Bucharest Churches 2022. And because we all joined resources and space. For example, our little church plant is renting commercial space in downtown Bucharest, and the landlord did not allow us to put mattresses in the space that we're renting. He said, well, this is commercial space. You're not allowed to have people sleep here. However, our mother church, that's a few miles further, they do own their facilities. And so they turned all of their office space including the senior pastor office, into a temporary shelter. We put mattresses everywhere, including in the worship center, in the auditorium, on the stage. We put the musical instruments aside and just put mattresses, and had to build temporary showers, and turn every single space, including in the yard outside, into places where we could collect storage space. Thank you. We could put all of these donations that were coming in by the grace of God. In terms of numbers, we've tried to keep track. So much had to be done without trying to keep track. I mean, it was in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. that a couple of hundreds came in the train station, and you try to just relocate as many as you can. So a lot of it could not be tracked because it was in the spur of the moment. But as the weeks went by, we have helped over 5,000 Ukrainians transitioning through Romania. Some of them, several hundreds, are still in our temporary shelters. Between all of these churches combined, UBC 22 has has reached the maximum capacity, a daily capacity of hosting about 400 per day, and so feeding them 3 meals a day. A few weeks into the war, we also started taking humanitarian aid into Ukraine, because close to the border to Romania, it was safe, and it still is. So we started taking convoys of 6, 7, 8, 10. I think 15 was the most that we've taken at once. Vans full of provisions, and if I'm correct, it's over 200 tons of provisions, over 200,000 kilometers. So that's probably over 130,000 miles driven, back and forth by dozens of volunteers. At least 30 times we have been into Ukraine. And this is just among our local efforts in Bucharest. All throughout the country, there are people helping. And I'm encouraged by that.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just practical help that was given, but also spiritual and emotional, because these were people that had been through huge trauma. They started 1 week in their homes, sleeping and going to work just like we all do. And then by the next week, they had all their possessions in a plastic bag, and they were in a country whose language they didn't understand, surrounded by people they had never met and being at their mercy. So there was a lot of trauma and a lot of people that were confused. And so what we did, there was a lot of spiritual help that was given. We offered prayer in groups. We offered them pastoral counseling. We were able to print some very brief, like 1-page resources on how to help your children process all this trauma that was happening to them. And you have to keep it brief because your brain doesn't have the power to process too much information at that point. And so basically what you want to say, if your child's acting out, it's okay. Just focus on getting through every day. And when you're settled, you can process this more. The need has been enormous for us.
It truly has been. Over 1.5 million people from Ukraine have transitioned through Romania. About 250,000 have stayed, are refugees in our country. We are the second country after Poland. I think Poland, it's somewhere around 6 million people have transitioned, and about 4 million have stayed into Poland. Overall, more than 10 million people have been displaced. I've seen various numbers reaching all the way up to 15 million, including those that have been displaced locally within Ukraine. And we really needed the Lord's help, and we still do, to face all of this tremendous need. It still feels like it's so much bigger than us. And we praise the Lord for all the help we have received. And I'm glad you mentioned the spiritual side to it all, because early on, we have started to provide chapel time almost every evening of the week. And obviously spiritual assistance everywhere that's needed. We have had people, we've had people ask about God in all this. Where is God in so much evil and suffering and injustice? And of course, we've had people asking for prayer, not only for them and their safety, but for those left behind in Ukraine. I remember visiting the offices of CRU campus, the former Campus Crusade for Christ in Bucharest, because some of the folks, some of their staff people are in our church, and they had done the same thing. They had turned their office space into temporary shelter, the bathrooms with temporary showers and so forth. So, and it was packed. What really touched me on that visit was as I was transitioning from one room to another, there was this staircase, right? As you have in the big buildings, which is kind of, normally staircases are empty, right? And so we took the the stairs to go up one floor, and one mother had gone there to just breastfeed her baby, and it touched me because I was having a baby at home. We had our daughter in October, and so when the war started and all this craziness, she was only a few months old. And when I saw this this mom not having the privacy of her home and the security of her home and bedroom and so forth to just care for her own baby, she was seeking and she needed a little bit of privacy, so she was on the staircase. That really broke me.
And another thing that really struck me was I remember this a story of two teenage girls that come with their grandmother. And it was very hard for the volunteers that were interacting with them because they kept saying, well, we want to go to this other place in Romania and we want to leave in an hour. And so the volunteers were like, okay, we can't really find transportation for you that quickly. And then an hour later, they would say, no, we want to go back to Ukraine. And so they were being very chaotic about what they needed to do as the next step. And our volunteers were really overwhelmed in trying to find solutions for them, but also trying to convince them not to go back because they had just come from Ukraine and it wasn't safe. And so they set them down. They're like, okay, let's talk and let's see, tell us about, what's happening to you. And it turned out that they had tried to escape and gotten in the back of a van, which was stopped by Russian forces. And everybody else in the van had been shot and they had hidden and they were the only ones that survived. And it took them several days to make it to the border. And so they had been through so much trauma that their brain just couldn't make proper decisions anymore. They were chaotic and panicked, and we tried to put them in a place where, like in an apartment, so that they wouldn't be in the big building with 40 mattresses on the floor, so they could feel a little bit more like at home, so they could just kind of calm down a little bit, and then when they feel a little bit safer, be able to make decisions. And this is just one of thousands of stories that we could say. I mean, the amount of suffering that has been happening and that has been kind of pouring into Ukraine and in the countries next to it is really hard to convey into words.
I have a story about the Lord's provision as well, which again, there are thousands of these, but this has truly encouraged me. How this particular family left from Odessa, and the young lady was a pastor's daughter, and they were able to come with their two kids, but their provisions were very limited, and they didn't know how would they make it out of Romania to build a future and safety for their kids in the West. They could only dream of the U.S., but the U.S. was at that point not giving visas. So they finally applied for Canada, a Canadian visa. A long story short, they were with us for several months, like 3 months. But during that time, the Lord provided them with a place to stay, with funds for food and the resources they need for their kids. And then the big needs, like they would call, that they barely had dared to ask us or even the Lord in prayer. Things like the visa actually came through, and then the airplane tickets. They were planning on selling their beat down car that they had driven from Ukraine into Bucharest to provide for some of the tickets, not all 4 of them. The car money would not have been enough, but the Lord provided through our partners and through our through our little church for all of their airfare needs, and even beyond that. So they were able to send the car back into Ukraine to her brother, who was left behind in Odessa. He couldn't leave the country. So that's just a story of the Lord's provision that truly encouraged them and us to see how the Lord had not forgotten these people, and the Lord came through and provided. And so I'm happy to report they sent us pictures from Canada. They found a local church there, and jobs and schools for their kids, and we rejoice just over this little story, which for them was everything. Big story for them. For us is one of the many.